Thanks everyone for joining another episode and a very, very special episode of Good Teams Win, Great Teams Cover. Tonight I'm joined by a very special guest. As you can see on the screen, we've got Coach Jim Mouse McNally joining us here. Coach McNally, thanks ever so much for coming and joining us on the show here tonight. It's an honor and a privilege to have you as a guest.
Thank you, Paul. It's good to be here. I'm sorry I kept you up late, but yeah, it's good. You know, I'm excited to be here and tell my story and wherever you want to start.
Cool. Well, Coach McNally, we're used to the late nights following the NFL here in the UK, so this is quite early for us. So this is not too bad. But you were a coach in the NFL for well over 25 years. The Bengals, Panthers, Giants, Bills. There's so much to ask you about, but we're here to talk about your life in football. So it'd be amiss for me not to start right at the very beginning, if that's okay, Coach, and talk about kind of how big a part of your kind of childhood and growing up was football, and how did you first fall in love with the game?
Yeah, well, when I was younger, we didn't have Little League football or Pee Wee football or whatever you call it. We had baseball. I was born in 1943. So you can imagine I grew up in what Tom Brokaw in his book said, the greatest generation, right after World War II. And my dad was a great high school and college player. He played locally here in Buffalo at a school called Canisius College, and he was a three-sport letterman. He graduated in 1928. He'd be 120 or 30 years old now, but so I mean, he kind of led me as I was growing up, to play sports, and like I say, baseball was the only place where we actually had a Little League games, etc. Football was more sandlot football, but my first year of organized football was in the 9th grade, the first year of high school. And then I played my last 3 years on the varsity here in Western New York, Buffalo area. The school was Kenmore originally. And when I was a sophomore, the school split. And so there was a Kenmore West and a Kenmore East. So my last 2 years, I was playing against guys who I was on the same team with the previous year. So the school Kenmore split the Kenmore West, Kenmore East. I stayed at Kenmore West. I was the captain the senior year. Probably the largest I ever was 5'9", maybe in high school 195. I was recruited at the University of Buffalo, which is in the Mid-American Conference. And my coach was Buddy Ryan, the infamous coach that invented the 46 defense. And but my first year, my grades coming out of high school weren't that good. So I had to go kind of to a night school so I could get eligible to play. And I got eligible. We had a freshman team. I didn't play much. And then my sophomore year, they converted me to a down lineman. I played what you would now call a one technique. We used the wide tackle 6 defense. I lettered as a sophomore, and I started for 2 years, got a scholarship. And after my 4 years at Buffalo, the University of Buffalo, I did not graduate. So I had a 5th year as a student coach, and they gave me a scholarship to be a student coach, and I helped with the defense. And then I went to graduate school. And in the States, when you go to graduate school and you help coach, they call that being a graduate assistant. So I was a graduate assistant for 2 years. They changed coaches. There was a new coach that came in. Eventually, I became the freshman coach, because back in the day when I started, freshmen were not eligible for the varsity. And then the coach that I was working for went to another school, and the coach that took over promoted me to the offensive line. I was 2 years at Buffalo as the offensive line coach. And in 1970, we dropped football. We just discontinued the sport. It was the time of the Vietnam War, student revolt. We didn't have the funds to travel all over the country like we were doing because our football team was getting better as far as the schedule. And I was looking for a job. So I ended up going to Marshall. And Marshall was the school that had the plane crash. 75 were killed. And 50 some were players, and the remainder were local townspeople, doctors, administrators. So I was 4 years at Marshall University. There were 3 coaches that were not killed because they had driven a car to scout some high school games. And if you see that movie, We Are Marshall, I am in the movie or someone playing me. He's about 6'7". It weighs about 260 pounds. And but the basics of that story is about a guy named Red Dawson, who was one of the coaches that was not killed. So an interesting story was that Red Dawson flew on the airplane to go when Marshall played East Carolina. And after the game on the trip back, Red gave his seat to an older coach who had driven a car, and Red drove the car back. And to this date, he still hasn't recovered for the tragedy because he recruited a lot of the players, and he felt terrible that that he gave his seat on a plane to an older coach who obviously was killed. And Red continued to coach with the new coaching staff for 2 years, and then he had to get out of it because he couldn't take the anxiety and the depression of being with all those players that were killed and the coaches. So basically, the movie We Are Marshall, whoever over there in the UK or in Europe watches that movie, the story is basically about the coach, Red Dawson. So I spent 4 years at Marshall. If you have any questions about Buffalo or Marshall, I'll answer them.
So I was going to ask, because you mentioned there around Marshall, obviously you started with Marshall in 71, the year after the plane crash. I believe Marshall were going to shut the football program down, but
they did not shut the
keep
program
it going.
down.
Yeah,
they kept it going.
Kept it going. How was it being part of that coaching team to rebuild the program?
Well, it was eerie. We had the freshmen were not able to play varsity, so all the freshman players were available, and there was about 4 varsity players that didn't make the trip because they were injured. So we had those returning varsity players who were really troubled because all their buddies and teammates were killed. Other than the 4 or 5 that were injured, didn't make the trip. So we had the 4 or 5 that didn't make the trip and the freshman team. And then we had a couple of guys come out for the basketball team, the track team. And the new incoming freshmen were eligible. The NCAA allowed us to play freshmen. And that was the first year that they allowed freshmen to play. That was 71. And then I think they allowed all colleges the next year, which would have been 72, to have freshmen eligible.
Yeah, I imagine just an unbelievable situation and tragedy to happen to then revive that football program and the work it must have taken. You mentioned obviously playing at the University of Buffalo, and to see, and I had a look at the coaches that were there. I was unbelievable to see. Buddy Ryan was one of the coaches at the University of Buffalo. How was playing for Coach Ryan?
Oh, he was. You either loved him or hated him, but I loved him, and he was a motivator. He had that Southern drawl, and he made you a football player. I remember, I think it was the winter of my sophomore year. We were going for off-season workouts, and I looked at my locker, and we had shoulder pads, helmet, hip pads, sneakers, and I said, "Wow, we're not going to play basketball with this helmet on." And we went in a room, and we put in his defense, which was that time was the wide tackle 6, and so we put in a brand new defense, and we went in a room probably 3 days a week before spring practice, which was totally illegal. And we just smashed each other, and we learned how to play that defense. And then when spring practice came, we already had an advantage because we had practice for a couple of months in the winter putting in this new defense. So we had a good team. I don't think our record was great, maybe 5-4 or 5-5 or so we just had a mediocre record, but we did have a good defense. And the sad part, my senior year, our last game, we were going to play Villanova, and it snowed so great in Buffalo, probably I don't know, 4 or 5 feet, that the field was so covered they couldn't even plow it. So a disappointment was my last game of my senior year. We didn't play the game, but playing for Buddy Ryan was great, and he was a motivator, and he actually made you want to play for him, and he was everything that they talk about.
Because what an experience being able to play for such a legendary coach. And you mentioned you obviously grew up in the Buffalo area, college in Buffalo, and then you finished your NFL coaching career in Buffalo with the Bills. What makes that city such a special football city, Buffalo?
Well, they call it a blue collar town. It used to be, we used to have a big steel mill, Bethlehem Steel. We were a big port. We're right on Lake Erie, and we, in the old days, did a lot of trade, and we were a chief port for ships coming in and factory workers, etc. And so it was a smaller, big city, and we had 2 major teams, the Buffalo Sabres in hockey and the Buffalo Bills in football. And, even now, particularly during the season, there's not a street corner you can't go by or a store you can't go in where half the people don't have Bills or Sabres hats or jerseys on, even today. So the Bills the original Bills started way back, and then they left. But the new Bills came in 1960, and their head coach was a guy named Buster Ramsey, and they wore the Detroit Lions uniforms, the silver and the blue, because that's where the coach had come from. So I had followed the Bills since they came back full-time in 1960 as one of the members of the original AFC teams. There was the Boston Patriots, the Buffalo Bills, I think they were I don't know if they were the Houston Oilers. They were the Houston Oilers, Kansas City. I don't know if they were the Chiefs, but they had one of the first teams, I believe the Oakland Raiders. But anyway, the Bills came back in the new league, the AFC. They did not play the NFC teams. There were 2 different leagues. And it wasn't until, I don't know, 15, 20 years later that the AFC and the NFC combined together to make the NFL. So I did follow the Bills in their earlier years. They had great teams. Jack Kemp, who was a big-time senator, a politician, was the quarterback. He's deceased now, but they were one of the top teams in the early AFC teams.
And with sort of, the link you have sort of with the Buffalo Bills and Buffalo, sorry, as the city as a whole, how special was it for you to finish your NFL coaching career with the Bills?
Well, it was special because I started high school here. I went to the university here. I followed the Bills. They were my team. And then 35 years later, after all my stops at 15 years in college and 27 years in the NFL, that adds up to about 34, 35 years, I came back home because after I was, bottom line is after Marshall, I went to Boston College for 3 years where I had 8 or 10 great NFL players that played in the NFL. Then I spent 2 years at Wake Forest where we had some outstanding 4 or 5 NFL offensive linemen. We beat Auburn, Georgia, North Carolina, Virginia Tech, a little old Wake Forest. And then I was hired at the Bengals. So I was 15 years with the Bengals, went to 2 Super Bowls. Then I was 4 years at the brand new Carolina Panthers, 5 years at the New York Giants, where we went to the Super Bowl in my second year, and then back home to the Bills. And I was with my hometown team, for 4 years. I reached retirement age, and I thought it was better to retire in good standing in my hometown than to get fired, because I knew that sooner or later they were going to fire the coach, because they had been through numbers of coaches every 4 or 5 years, fire a coach, fire a coach, fire a coach, because we never really had a quarterback. The best year we had was my first year under Coach Mike Mularkey. We had Drew Bledsoe as our quarterback, and he was damn good. We were 9-7, and our last game was against the Pittsburgh Steelers. This was 2004, my first year with the Bills. And if we won the game, we were going to the playoffs. They were already in the playoffs, so they didn't play all their players, and we lost the game, which was very disappointing. Coach Mularkey stayed 1 more year, and he quit on his own. He was not fired. Then Coach Duran came in. I was 2 years with him, and I retired. And immediately, the New Orleans Saints, with my friend Sean Payton, who I had worked with the Giants, he hired me as a consultant for 2 years. And then I went to the Jets for 2 years with my good friend Bill Callahan and Rex Ryan. Buddy's son was the head coach. I was there 2 years. And then the Bengals rehired me for another 10. So I was probably 16 years as a consultant, which was almost like a coach, but you didn't have to be there all the time. You did all your work on an iPad. You'd go to training camp. And I was kind of an advisor, or, a guy that would be a good person to bounce ideas off and do projects. So I did come back home. I ended up retiring where I am right now in Buffalo. And while I was here in Buffalo, I was able to be a consultant with 3 teams, because I would do everything over an iPad or a computer. And you didn't have to be in that city full time.
You mentioned you stopped there at the New York Jets and working with Coach Rex Ryan.
Yes.
How much of Buddy did you see in Rex?
Rex was a little more not laid back. I mean, he was serious about football. He was a great defensive coach, but he liked to, he liked to laugh, joke around a little bit, have a little fun, where his dad was all business. I mean, now he might have had a fun social life with the other coaches or his other friends, but, with the players and on the field, he was all business. Rex had a good sense of humor, and he was also a guy that was a player's coach, and you liked him. He was good, but Buddy was a little more full-time football, as far as getting in your ass.
Good stuff. I think Rex took those Jets teams to the back-to-back AFC championships, didn't he? And you could see that those players definitely played for Rex Ryan, and that defense was a mean, tough unit for sure.
Yeah, that's true. Yes. I think one of my greatest moments as far as playing against a great defense was my second year with the Giants in 2000. We had a good team, and we beat the Vikings to go to the Super Bowl. We beat them 41-0, and we played the 2000 Baltimore Ravens. Man, they had Ray Lewis. Inside, they had two huge guys, Sam Adams, Tony Saragusa. They had two good defensive ends. They had Ray Lewis. They had a guy named McAllister, who was a great corner. They had a great running back. Their quarterback was average, but he was good enough. And they're every bit as good as the 85 Chicago Bears. So I tell everybody that when we went a week early to get prepared for the Super Bowl we were in Tampa, I said we could have gone the same day of the game, and it wouldn't have mattered that we went a week beforehand, because they would have kicked our butt.
Still that good, and that was one of the questions we come to it. But I'll ask you now: how was that experience going to that Super Bowl, 2000 Super Bowl against the Baltimore Ravens with the Giants? How was that experience different from the two close games with the Bengals against the 49ers?
Oh, well, it was, they were both close games. Joe Montana both times brought the 49ers back to victory. We were in both games right till the end. But with Baltimore, I don't know the exact timing, but somewhere in the early second half, we knew, and I don't know what the score was, 27-7 or something. We were out of it. I mean, it wasn't close, and the Ravens were everything that they were supposed to be. So, yeah, it was. I mean, the others were disappointing losses, but we got our butt kicked. and they had great players.
For sure, it's certainly one of the legendary defenses and all-time defenses. I think when you look back and such dominant performance in the Super Bowl itself, and the work that it takes to get there is no mean feat. But I suppose tough to end the year like that. Just wanted to ask as well, Coach McNally, you made the transition from college to the NFL coaching when you started with the Cincinnati Bengals in 1980. How challenging was it for you to transition from coaching in college to coaching in the NFL?
Well, it wasn't a big change, because the Bengals did not have a good record the year before. I think they were 4-12. So it would be different if I was going to a team that went to the playoffs or won the Super Bowl or was in the Super Bowl, and then I'd have had a lot to prove. But as it turned out, Forrest Gregg was the new head coach, and he was going to keep the line coach, Mike McCormick, as his line coach, but Mike ended up being the head coach with the Baltimore Colts. So he was looking for a line coach, and one of his coaches, when he was at the Toronto Argonauts, this is Forrest Gregg, told him, take a look at this kid from Wake Forest, which was me. And so I had an interview with Coach Gregg, and we got along well. And obviously he hired me. But in our first year in the first round was Anthony Munoz, the greatest player to ever play his position. So I not only had the greatest player to ever play his position, we were replacing a staff that did not have a good record and was fired. So it was not a hard transition, because I think the players thought that they were learning a lot from a new, younger guy that may have had some updated techniques or new ideas or thoughts on blocking that maybe they didn't have before. So it was an easy transition. I think our record was only 7-9 that first year in 1980, but then the next year, I believe we were 12-4 and went to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, and when you kind of arrived at the Bengals, you mentioned there tackle Anthony Munoz. And, I guess that does make life easier as the O-line coach if you have Anthony Munoz there. How involved were you in the draft pick itself?
Well, it was an easy pick. We got the third pick. And I think that year, if I can mistaken, the first pick to Detroit was Billy Sims, the great running back. The second pick was a receiver from Texas, Johnny Lamb Jones. Okay, so they took a running back, a receiver, and then Anthony Munoz. We had the third pick. And, it was an easy decision. I mean, the decision was made immediately when the season was over. I mean, between the owner, Paul Brown, who I spent a good 10 years with, his son, Mike, who is now the head of the program, and the head coach, that Munoz was the guy that we were going to take if he was still there. We were scared to death that one of those other teams was going to take, Detroit or the Jets were going to take Munoz. And then I was with him 13 years, and he had never had a knee problem. And he had two major knee surgeries at Southern Cal. In fact, his senior year, he played his first game against Texas Tech, blew out his knee, and didn't come back until the last game against Ohio State in the Rose Bowl. So he only played 2 games his senior year.
How much of a concern was it for you and for kind of the organization and the Bengals that Munoz did have those kind of historic injuries in college? Would you feel it was something he was going to be able to overcome?
I think when he went to the combine and we had our own doctors check him out, that he was 100%. I mean, his he did private workouts and he could run and move and change direction, and he didn't lose a step. I mean, whatever he did before, I didn't watch his whole career, but he was perfect. I mean, he had scars on his knee, but he did not show any loss of mobility in the workouts that he was put through.
Yeah, it's like an insane combination of that agility for someone 6'5", 250 plus pounds. Just insane agility, maybe way before what we'd seen become a more regular feature in linemen in the NFL. But when did it hit you, Coach McNally, that you really had something truly special and a generational talent in Munoz?
Well, I think it hit me the first day of training camp when he came for a visit before the draft. We went out to lunch, and then when he came to, we drafted him, and then when he came to training camp, because we didn't have all those off-season workouts, we'd have mini camp, one mini camp, I believe. And then you could tell right away. I mean, he was smooth, athletic, strong. So you could tell it was just a matter of time. I think we put Munoz right away at left tackle, started first day. And the former left tackle, who was a good player, we moved him to right tackle where he had never played. And so that former left tackle knew the writing was on the wall because we moved him to a very strange position for him. It wasn't quite fair, but Munoz was the first pick, and so in one case we were excited about the left tackle, but in another case the right tackle, kind of was disappointed, had a long face on him, and eventually he was replaced by a guy named Mike Wilson anyway. So I do remember, I think the first game in his second year, he had 28 pancakes. We played Seattle. I don't remember the guy he was playing against, and they weren't all on the run. So on a pass or a run, his man was on the ground 28 times.
Wow. That's scary, that kind of domination, and just absolutely.
He was a big guy, I'm saying he was 6'6". He weighed 300 pounds. He wasn't 260 or 270. He was 300 pounds. I mean, he was he was big enough. He was big enough to play now. He was so quick. He was a baseball pitcher at Southern Cal. And I mean, I do remember him after hot summer double day workouts, morning and afternoon. He'd go out and run, and then he would be so dehydrated we had to hook him up, with fluid. And I asked him, I said, "What's wrong with you?" I gotta stay in shape. I said, "Well, you're in shape." But he was fantastic. I mean, whoever we played against, we'd put his name on the board, the defensive guy, and I would just erase it. Yeah. So we called him the eraser. Now, he was like everybody else. He'd get beat occasionally. He had to play against some great players. The 49ers in the Super Bowl, our second year, they had a great pass rusher. I should show his name. I think he's in the Hall of Fame. He was kind of an undersized guy, but he was fast now. I mean, he gave Anthony a little trouble, not often, but he was a fast guy. He played Leroy Selman. Bruce Smith was a guy he played a lot of times. So he had to play against a lot of good competition.
Yeah. You mentioned the turnaround there within the second year, the Cincinnati Bengals. Second year of you being there, the Cincinnati Bengals made it to the Super Bowl, turned it from a 6-10 season the year before to 12-4. What kind of your memories from that first Super Bowl 16 against the San Francisco 49ers?
Not much other than Kenny Anderson completed a lot of passes to Dan Ross, Chris Collinsworth. Our big disappointment was we were on like the 1 foot line, and we ran the ball 3 times, I think, and threw 1 pass and couldn't make a yard. A guy named Dan Buns, outside linebacker, tackled. We threw a quick pass in the flat to Charlie Alexander, and I swear he was this far from the goal line. And we would have been in the game, either tied it or gone ahead. And that was the big disappointment of that game, that goal line stand that they made. And then Joe Montana brought them back just like he did in the second game. But I think it was our inadequacy on the goal line that was the biggest disappointment, when you only had a yard to go or a foot.
When you're coaching in the game, especially in the Super Bowl, do you get any time to kind of take in the occasion, or are you just so laser focused on the game plan and how the game's flowing to even be able to stop and take it in?
It's like every other game that you coach in. You try to get your players on the sideline. I think what hits you is the enormous whatever. I mean, you're on national TV in every country in the world, and it's the biggest stage, and that may be going through your mind as you're coaching your players or making suggestions, but it doesn't necessarily affect you, but it's there. It's like I say, and I've been in 4 Super Bowls, lost every one of them, 3 with the Bengals, 1 with the Giants, and it's enormous. I mean, it probably is a little unfair because it's a 1-game hit or miss, where most of the other championships, hockey, baseball, etc., you got to play a lot of games. Well, baseball, 7 World Series, but football, there's so much trauma to the body that you can't play the best out of 3 and get it done. So I'm not so sure that a 1 game actually proves who the real champions are. I would think it would be a 3-game, but obviously couldn't do that. And just like the Philadelphia Eagles last year, they may be a better football team than the Chiefs, but the Chiefs won. And they have a great team with a great quarterback. So it's a one-game hit or miss.
Right.
And so I don't think when you lose the Super Bowl that you think we're that terrible. You felt bad. You felt as if you didn't win a game that year, but when out of 32 teams, when you come down that you're just one of two, and you have time to reflect on it, it's pretty neat.
Cool, good stuff. And I think you guys got to quite quickly a second one with the Bengals, and that was under Coach Sam White. Sam White came in '84, and I think it's fair to say Coach White was pretty innovative. I think he was behind kind of the Bengals adapting the no huddle 2-minute offense as a base offense.
Yeah, we were the first ones, and I'll argue the point, that used the no huddle type where we go to the line of scrimmage immediately and take the full, I don't remember, was 35 or 40 seconds. I think it's 40 seconds now, or well, how many seconds are there?
It's 40 now on the play clock.
Yeah, with the play clock. Yeah, I don't remember if it was 35 then or 40 then, but we would take the full 37 seconds before we snapped the ball. The defensive linemen were in their stance, and they were so tired because we were under center the majority of the time, where he could receive the snap at any time. We had a lot of code words. We spent a lot of time with the words that he would use when we finally would have a live color that would tell us this is the play we're running and this is the snap count, etc. And no other team had done that. Now, many teams had done the fast huddle, but no one had done the real slow huddle like we did. So we had a fast huddle, a slow huddle, a sugar huddle, where we'd line up like 3 yards from the line of scrimmage, and Boomer would call the play in the coded words, rather than call the specific play. And it was interesting. It was, Sam was ahead of his time.
And how was that for you then, coaching the old line, in terms of them making all that work as an offense?
Oh, it was good, because when we got good at it, there were 3 or 4 years we were pretty good at it, and we led the NFL in rushing, I think, 3 years in a row. So it wasn't only the no huddle. I mean, it was our running attack. Well, Boomer with the play action also was a great quarterback for us. And we had Ickey Woods and James Brooks and Stanley Wilson and Chris Collinsworth and Isaac Curtis, Eddie Brown. These were great football players. And on defense, Tim Crumry. And, we had a good team. And it lasted for, well, I was there for, I was there for 15 years, and Munoz was there 13, and Sam was there for about 8 or 9 before he went to Tampa. So we had the same guys together for a long time, being coaches and players. So it was kind of automatic.
So you mentioned Boomer there. So Boomer Esiason got drafted by the Bengals in '84, and I think the Cincinnati Bengals were one of the most potent offenses, certainly of the late '80s. What was it that brought it all together? What was it that made that offensive unit gel and made them so productive?
I think it was Boomer. I think it was Boomer handling the play calling, being able to run the play action passes, throw the ball deep, and Hank Bulla, the defensive coordinator, the first 4 years was outstanding. And then Dick LeBeau, obviously. We were just ahead of our time offensively. And the year we went to the second Super Bowl under Sam, we just kept winning, and we lost 4 games. The biggest disappointment, I think, was we were moving pretty good, and then somewhere about mid-season we played the Patriots, who had Doug Flutie, who was a good player, and they were a good team, but we thought we were going to walk right over them, and they beat us. And that kind of got us down to reality, where we found out that we weren't untouchable.
You mentioned there, obviously, that season ended in the second Super Bowl, and unfortunately, the second Super Bowl lost to Montana and the 49ers. In your opinion, is that 1988 Bengals team the best team to not win a Super Bowl?
Oh, well.
It's a tough question.
Of all Super Bowls forever, or just for the Bengals?
Well, maybe just of all time, because when you look at the talent on it.
I don't think we were the best team of all time to lose. I don't know who might be, but I don't think it was us. I mean, you could say we were, because those are all theoretical questions. You know what I mean? It was kind of like the Buffalo Bills, they lost 4 Super Bowls, but they lost them all to NFC teams. And it was probably that, we just weren't quite good enough, to beat the 49ers or to beat some of the NFC teams. I think the NFC perhaps for a few years there, maybe a decade, maybe had the better teams. I'd have to do a study on that, but I think you can see for sure, because the Buffalo Bills how many teams go to the Super Bowl 4 years in a row? But they couldn't beat the Cowboys twice, I believe, the Redskins once, and then whoever the other team was that they played, was an NFC team.
And that some achievement to get there, for 4 years in a row to get there, like your Bengals team did twice in such a short space of time in itself is such an achievement. You mentioned, you've touched on it already, you moved to the brand new Carolina Panthers in '95. How was it being part of a brand new expansion team and being part of the coaching staff for a brand new team?
Well, it was a lot different than the Bengals, because the Bengals, we didn't have a lot of scouts, and the coaches did a lot of scouting. I might have gone to 30, 40 trips during the off season in my 15 years with the Bengals, and we were able to move the players up and down on the board, who we liked, who we didn't like. Mike and Paula Brown allowed the assistant coaches to really be the scouts, which I loved, because but you only saw the player for a day, where a legitimate scout might see the kid 3 or 4 times. So sometimes the scouts are better than the coaches at picking players. That was what it was like at the Panthers. At the Panthers, Bill Polian, the GM, who was a great GM, he led the Bills to all those Super Bowls. He said that the coaches coach and the scouts scout. The coaches were able to contribute, and they were asked questions about players, college players, but the scouts made the decision, and the GM, along with the head coach, made the decisions, and the coaches didn't quite have the input. But they had all the input in coaches. He didn't want the scouts to mess around with the coaches. He didn't want the coaches to mess around with the scouts. So that's one thing I learned when I went to the Panthers. And plus, it was a brand new program. Us and the Jaguars were 2 brand new teams. And after 1 year, we had a beautiful brand new Ericsson Stadium, state-of-the-art facilities, and it was. Our owner, Jerry Richardson, he had owned, Arby's, not Arby's, but Hardee's and a few other restaurants. And he was a wealthy man, but just to be around him, he's a very impressive guy, about 6'6", played football at the Colts. And it was a change, and it was interesting, because coaches coached and scouts scouted.
How was it being in Charlotte then, compared to kind of Cincinnati or Buffalo, where you've been before, in terms of kind of the nature of football in the city?
Well, we were a brand new team, so it was all different. brand new. So all the players we got were either from the draft or we were allotted players from other teams. Every team was able to put 2 or 3 players out. And as it happened, our general manager was former general manager with the Bills, Bill Polian. And so we had a number, 8, 10 players from the Bills. They were kind of in their last year or two, but they were still good players. So, it was interesting how we got players from other teams and how we molded into a team. And then the second year, we went to the championship game against Green Bay. Now, that's unheard of for an expansion team. But we had such good players that the other NFL teams put out there for us to choose from. And that was an interesting way that we built a football team. To go to the championship game in your second year being a brand new franchise.
Yeah, I mean, not just getting to the championship game, being the number 1 seed in the NFC, going 12-4.
Yeah.
Why did it come together so quickly, do you think? Because it's so, you mentioned that, you just get the players through the expansion draft.
Well, we had a great defense. We had a great defensive head. The head coach was the defensive coach, Dom Capers. We had 2 outside linebackers, Kevin Green, Lamar Latham. I mean, we'd get 6, 7 sacks a game. Plus, we had a defense that many people couldn't adjust to. A lot of blitzing, zone pressures, and we had some great players. We had a great nose guard from Denver, Greg Cragen. We had a great defensive end, Mike Fox from the New York Giants. We had Sam Mills, a great inside linebacker from the New Orleans Saints. We had better players than the other teams, and they molded together.
That's great. Like I say, unheard of to see it come together so quickly. But yeah, brilliant to be part of that coaching team to make that happen. You mentioned we've already touched on your time in the New York the Giants with Super Bowl 35 and the Ravens, and we talked about how special it was to come back to finish your NFL career coaching at the Buffalo Bills. It's interesting.
It was a big. We were fired at the Giants. Jim Fossa was fired. I was looking for a job. I got an offer from the Chicago Bears and an offer from the Bills because Tom Donahue was the GM for the Bills, and he had been at Pittsburgh for years when I was at Cincinnati. So he knew me. I was actually hired at the Bills. I was hired at the Bills before they hired the head coach. But the head coach approved me, and he liked me, Malarkey. But it was great because the whole community are Bills backers, and I probably still had well over 100 friends that were here because that was years ago, and a lot of them hadn't died yet. So, I mean, it was like going to dreamland. The problem is, other than Drew Bledsoe the first year, we never, ever had a quarterback that could lead us to enough victories. And then that happened for years and years and years and years until they got Josh Allen. So the problem was I was home with my homeboys, my local friends, and I was disappointed that we didn't. The 4 years I was there, we never had a very good team except the first year. So it was like a catch-22. It's like, what you wish for, maybe you shouldn't wish for. But what it did do is bring me home. It brought me home to where all my friends are. And so after retirement, I was home where I really wanted to be because that's where I had spent probably 28 years before I left to go to Marshall. So I was 28 years married, 34 years later, I came back home. So it wasn't so much the experience with the Bills, it was the experience of being back home with all my friends and family.
And you touched on there that there's a bit of a window now for the Buffalo Bills right now.
Yes.
You mentioned with Josh Allen, they've been close in the playoffs the last couple of years. we see a lot around kind of the fanatical support that the city of Buffalo gives the Bills with Bills Mafia and everything. What would a championship mean to that city?
Oh my God, it would be, well, I mean, it would be probably just the same thing that happened to Kansas City when they won their most recent championship. And it's not that the Bills had never been to the Super Bowl. They were 4 years in a row, but those were still great years with Jim Kelly and Thurman Thomas, and even though they didn't win them, but it was been such a drought before they even went to a Super Bowl that it means everything to the city of Buffalo. Just like with the Sabres. I mean, there's so many hockey teams now. I mean, I don't know how they even compute. I mean, I might be wrong. The hockey season is over, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think it finished start of July, maybe. I think it's like October.
Yeah. Then it goes right into July. So, but again, the Sabres have been down for a number of years, and but I mean, with Josh Allen, they have a chance to win every game, and plus they have other good players too, obviously.
What do you think it would take? What do you think it takes, or what do you think the Bills are missing that's stopping them from getting over the hump at the minute? Because they've been close.
I don't think they're missing. I don't think they're missing anything. It's just you're not going to win every game. That's the deal. That's it. Period. I mean, nobody's got 100% the best players in every position. Well, you need a little better running back. You need another receiver. You need a third wideout. You need an extra D. Oh, that's all bullshit. You know what I mean? If they can always say you need a little bit of this, a little bit of that. I think injuries, one, and they have a good defensive line. They lost their middle linebacker, but they have another good inside linebacker, number 58. I forget his name. I shouldn't forget his name, but he's outstanding. He makes about every tackle. So I think they're as good as anyone. Everybody's got a shortcoming, but I'm not in their building. I don't watch them practice. So I don't know what they down deep think they need, but I think they've got all the makings to make it to the Super Bowl. And don't forget, it's a 17-game season. And you're not going to win every game.
No, it's long. The AFC especially stacked, isn't it, as well? So it is, it's real difficult to come out of that AFC.
Absolutely.
You mentioned you did, once you finished your coaching career in the NFL, you have done some consulting across the Saints, the Jets, and the Bengals. How else are you sort of stayed involved in the game? I see some of the stuff you put out on Twitter as well, which is great.
Yeah, a good friend of mine who I never knew, a high school coach out of Virginia, his name is Troy Taylor. He has his own podcast called The Totem Pole, and he's the head football coach at L.C. Bird High School, and they're a very good team. And he says, you ought to come on Twitter. I said, I don't know a thing about Twitter. So he got me on Twitter, and Elon Musk, I think, had changed everybody's name. I had to get a new handle. And then I have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of video clips on my iPad. And sometimes I put out 30 or 40 a day for free to the whole world. And I've got, since February, I've got almost 16,000 followers. And which isn't like 100,000 followers, but I've only been doing it since February. So I spend a good part of my morning on Twitter giving out free information. I also have some information that people can buy some of my videos on something called CoachTube that's actually on YouTube. You just punch in CoachTube and you can see Coach McNally's videos. They're not very expensive. And I've stayed updated with all the recent videos that I've accumulated over the years. So even though I'm almost 80 years old, and I believe that I'm as updated as you could be at my age with the newest techniques, where most coaches my age who may have retired 10, 12 years ago kind of got lost and don't stay on top of it. But because I have an iPad and information and updated uh, plays on video, I have pretty well stayed up with the football. The hardest thing are the protections. You know, everybody wants to get everybody out because you can't keep everybody in the block because nobody's open. So all the protections and the blitzes and all that, very complicated. But I've tried to stay up on that. And there's never an exact answer. There's always going to be a free guy that's going to hit your quarterback. So that's why they say, oh, this team's low line's no good. Well, that's not true. I mean, maybe they send everybody out. You only got so many people to block, and they bring in one extra guy. And if the quarterback doesn't get rid of it, he's going to get blasted.
And definitely a great follow on Twitter. Go follow Coach McNally on Twitter at Coach McNally OL. You will learn a thing or two about offensive line play, I promise you. I have to ask, and I've saved this question for near the end, Coach McNally, and I hope that's okay. Obviously, You're affectionately known as Mouse. Where did the nickname come from? And yeah, tell us how you were named Mouse.
The exact story is maybe I'm 12 years old, so I'm not quite in high school. Maybe I'm in the 7th grade or whatever, and I'm down at the local field, which is right down the street, and there were some bigger guys playing touch football. I mean, some high school guys, and they said, "Hey, Jimmy, come on, play with us." I said, "Okay." I mean, there wasn't tackle football, and I was a little guy, like a 12-year-old, and I was pretty quick. And they got one guy who was my neighbor down at the end of the street. He was probably a high school junior or senior, and I was still, like in grade school. He said, "Look at the little mouse running around." Now, this is when I'm a little kid. And that stuck with me till this date. My wife started calling me Mouse, and I hadn't met her till college. But somewhere along the line, someone would say Mouse, and, "Oh, your nickname is Mouse?" Yeah, well, I wasn't bragging like my name is Mouse, but there might have been 2 or 3 other little guys playing in that day, and maybe they had remembered that my nick, and I'll be damned, every place I'd go, the Panthers, the Giants, the Bills, Mouse, it stood. And I think how it happened was my wife always called me Mouse. So maybe we're at a party or we're somewhere and they knew me as Jim, but all of a sudden my wife says Mouse, whatever. And she says, "Mouse." I mean, someone else would say Mouse. And then everybody started calling me Mouse. And then I became Coach Mouse McNally. And then I became Coach Mouse. And that's it. That's how it started. And that one guy is still proud that he's the guy that gave me the nickname when I was 12 years old. And I'm going to be almost 80, and it's stuck. There's not a person that doesn't call me Mouse. And I don't wish them to call me Mouse. I don't care. You call me Mouse, Jim, Mac, I don't care. But it doesn't offend me. But what I'm saying is everyone calls me Mouse.
Yeah, it's interesting. All those years, it's stuck. It's amazing. We're almost up, and I'm going to finish up in a second, Coach McNally. But are we okay to just finish off with some quick fire questions? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Who would you say is the best player you coached in college?
Oh, geez. Well, it had to be at the 2 biggest schools I was at, which would have been Wake Forest and Boston College. I coached the starting left guard for the New York Giants at Wake Forest, Bill Ard. And they used to have a cheer with the Giants in Giant Stadium, Ard for your guard, or Ard is your guard. I coached him at Wake Forest. He was a great player. At the Boston College, I coached a center named Don Masick, who must have played 10 to 12 years with the San Diego Chargers. He was a great center. I coached a guy named Tom Lynch, a big tackle guard guy, played for the Bills and the Seahawks. He was a great player. So I guess the best players I coached were either at Wake Forest or at Boston College. I mean, I had some good players that were tough, hard-nosed guys at Buffalo and Marshall, but it wasn't quite the same level of football as Boston College or Wake Forest. So I really can't say I had one great player because I had 4 or 5 that were all outstanding at both of those schools. I also had Jason Peters at the Bills, where we converted to a offensive tackle. And I don't know if he's still playing with the Cowboys, but he's got to be the oldest offensive lineman if he's still playing. And he was a rookie free agent in 2004. So he might have been the second greatest player I coached. But we had some great players at the Bengals other than Munoz. But I know I'm changing topics.
No, it's good.
To the pro, but you know, at the Bengals, we had a right tackle named Joe Walter, 6'7", 315 pounds. Now, Boomer was left-handed. So Joe Walter was as important as Anthony Munoz because when Boomer would drop back, he would turn and his blind side was his right. So in those great years, Joe was just as important as Anthony at protecting the quarterback.
And on that point, with Boomer being left-handed, how did that change again? How you coached the O-line, or did it not? Or did you not have to do anything different, or was it just the trust in who you had there on the edges?
No, we didn't. We didn't change a thing. We did well. When we played Reggie White, maybe we had the tight end help, not because Joe couldn't block him, because there was a lot of times that the tight end went out. And I think when we played the Eagles, I don't think Reggie White got a sack. Now he may have pressured the quarterback a little bit, but our guy did one hell of a job on Reggie White. And he did a good job against Gastineau with the Jets. His name is Joe Walter. And I occasionally I'd call him Walters. He said, no, I'm not big enough for 2. I'm only 1. It's only Walter, Joe Walter.
It's a good way to remember it. You've already answered my next question, because I was going to ask, outside of Anthony Munoz, who might be the greatest player you've coached. You mentioned Jason Peters there. He was still playing playoff games for the Cowboys last season.
Yes, I don't know what he's doing. I don't know if he's retired or not, but I know he tried to play forever if he could. But I mean, he went from a free agent tight end from Arkansas who was a mammoth guy. I mean, he was at 6'4" and a little bit. He wasn't quite the 6'5" range, but he weighed about 330 pounds. And when he was a free agent with the Bills in 2004, we actually cut him, okay? And other teams worked him out. No one ever really signed him. And luckily, just before the season, for whatever reason, we got a guy hurt. We re-signed him to our team. He ended up his rookie year being our very best special teams player. Against the Bengals on a punt, he broke through the line. He ran over the personal protector, the guy that protected the punter. Back in the old days, there was only one guy back there. Now there's 3. He ran right over him. He blocked the kick and scored a touchdown.
It's impressive, certainly impressive athlete, and playing all the way till he was 40 years old in the NFL, which is no mean feat, especially on the line as well. Throughout your career, Coach McNally, who's been your biggest inspiration?
Oh, geez. I don't know. Maybe my wife for just putting up with me, because we've moved 10 times. Now, don't forget, when you move, you got kids. Well, first of all, I was at the Bengals 15 years. So my kids didn't have to move, like they're in the 7th grade and I move and they have to change schools. They went all through grade school, junior high school, even most of their college days, and I was still at the Bengals. But the point I'm trying to make, we moved 10 times we moved twice in Cincinnati to different homes, but we didn't move out of Cincinnati. But then we moved to the Giants, and then we moved to the Panthers. Then we moved to the Giants, and then we moved back here to Buffalo. And Cincinnati, we moved twice. So all those different moves, my wife had to sell the house, find a new house, because I was living in a hotel with the new team, going to work every day. She did all the work. So I guess her inspiration certainly helped. I don't think I had any real inspiration. I think most recently, some younger coaches that I had coached are my biggest inspiration. A guy named John Strollo, who you can find on YouTube. I coached him at Boston College, but he's one of the smartest coaches that I know. He had coached a number of years at a lot of schools. His name is spelled with Strollo. And then Scott Peters, who's the assistant line coach with the Browns. I coached him with the Giants, but he was a world champion in jiu-jitsu after he got done playing. And he was the smartest guy with the use of the hands, with an updated, martial arts, etc. Those two younger guys perhaps motivated me more than any older person.
Cool. Now, there's been well over 200 wins that you've been a part of in your NFL career. Which one is your favorite one? Or do you have a favorite win as part of an NFL team as a coach?
No, not really, because if you look at it, the last time I was full-time coach was 2007. Now, how many years is that? 16 years ago? I haven't lost my marbles yet, but I can't remember back 16 years and then previous 27. There was probably a championship game that you knew you were going to go to the Super Bowl. Okay. So beating the Buffalo Bills twice as the second playoff game, both times with the Bengals. The third with the Bengals when they beat the Chiefs as a coach, consultant. And then with the Giants, when we beat the Vikings, who had Randy Moss, we beat them 41-0 to go to the Super Bowl against Baltimore. So it was probably the last game before you went to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, the conference championship games for sure, and hell of games to win. In your opinion, Coach McNally, who is the best offensive line currently in the NFL?
Probably the Eagles, but I don't know every player. I know Kelsey because he was at the University of Cincinnati. I think way back when I was with the Bengals, that's how long he's been playing, or with the Bengals in some capacity, even as a consultant. But they seem to be making the most plays or protecting the quarterback. Now, they've got a great quarterback too now. Let's not forget that. But I would probably think that perhaps the Philadelphia Eagles.
And this last question, I ask this to every single guest that comes on the show for the upcoming season. Who do you think is going to be in Super Bowl 58? Who do you think the matchup's going to be?
Geez, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know how you stop Patrick Mahomes if he's healthy. Even though he's got to play some other great quarterbacks like the Bills quarterback and the Bills. And, Jacksonville's getting better. San Diego, they all got those good quarterbacks. As long as Patrick Mahomes is healthy, they're going to be in the Super Bowl, barring some key injury. Now, who they're going to play? Probably the Eagles.
That's probably the most popular answer, the rerun, run it back from Super Bowl 57, Chiefs-Eagles. That's the one. I think that's what I'm pulling, looking at as well, I think, as the possible outcome. Coach McNally, I just want to say thank you so much for joining me tonight on Good Teams Win Great Teams cover. It's been brilliant. An hour and 10 minutes has just flown by. It's been great to talk football with you and talk your football life. Everybody go and give Coach McNally a follow on Twitter. There's his Coach Tube if you're looking for some more detailed analysis and support with your game or with any budding coaches that are out there. Coach McNally is a great person to get in touch with. So thank you very much, Coach McNally.
Oh, anytime you need me to come back. We'd have to change the subject to something else, but because we've covered about every possible thing in football that I've done. So, but thank you for having me, and I appreciate it.
No worries. Thanks very much. And we'll see you again soon on Good Teams Win, Great Teams Cover.
Okay, bye.